Hello, Paul. How are you? Come on in and sit down. That's our guest, Paul West. He's just arrived. You can sit either one. Why don't you sit right there? Be very comfortable. Yeah, hi, hello, this is AC Lowe. This is the AC Lowe Show over the Shantani Broadcasting Network. We broadcast to you live every Monday night from New York City. We are broadcasting from the beautiful Chez Jacqueline, 72 McDougal Street. Wonderful French cuisine. Come on down, say hello to everybody. Say hello to the waitstaff. Say hello to Frank Girardi, the owner and proprietor. Say hello to Bill Russo, the host of the premier flagship program of the Shantani Network, the Bill Russo Show, immediately following this program. So do not touch that mouse. Keep your hands off of it because you're going to be listening to a lot of fine entertainment. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. We have a marvelous guest, and we have only a very short time because we have to pay bills in between. I'm not going to talk about the young people downtown in the financial area. I just want to give my silent prayer of thanks. It's about time that someone went down there and said something. I've been talking on the radio, but that's just an empty thing. These young people are down there. Some of them have been arrested. They think that something is very wrong. They're not communists. They're not fascists. They understand the profit motive. They are not anti-capitalist. They just feel that the principle of making as much as you want and the hell with everybody else is not as important a principle as the other 300 million people. And it's interesting because the book that we're going to talk about tonight, First Cause, which our guest has written, speaks to that directly and indirectly, and we're going to have an interesting time talking about that. So as I said, I'm not going to talk about the people downtown, even though I just spent about a minute or so. I should really spend a lot more time and bring someone here. I want to talk this evening briefly about Irina Sendler. Irina Sendler, a good friend of mine, Amanda Gordon, who's been on this program, sent me a message about her. Well, what she did is just beyond comprehension. Over a period of several years, she smuggled out from the Nazis more than 2,500 Jewish children and infants who would have most likely gone to the gas chamber. At a minimum, they would have been beaten to death. And she did it day after day, smuggling them out in her little bag, smuggling them out in the knapsack, smuggling them out in the tool bag, smuggling them out in every way she could. She had a dog that scared off the Nazi soldiers. And the soldiers didn't want anything to do with the dog. They didn't think much about her. And we just want to say that what she has done, what she did, is just beyond comprehension. Beyond comprehension. How she did that will never be known. She was up for the Nobel Prize and she was not selected. We don't know how she was not selected. She saved 2,500 children at risk of her own death. And she was finally caught and had both her legs broken and her arms and was beat severely. They only thought that they caught her that first time with one infant. They didn't realize that she'd been doing it for many years. And I just want to say that our hat is off here at Shantani to Irina Sendler. And we want to thank Amanda Gordon for letting us know about Irina and for just, giving us the heads up, because these people fall through the cracks and they're forgotten. They do enormous things, incomprehensible things, and they're forgotten. And she did this, a selfless act. It's a long time ago, but we don't forget about it. We don't forget about it. It's just wonderful. And I want to thank Amanda again. Thank you, and thank you, and thank you, and thank you. And now, without further ado, because I know we have a short program, it's only a 1-hour show, I want to bring to you our guest this evening, Mr. Paul West. Paul has written a book called First Cause. I'm not going to tell you about it. I read the book through once, and I read it in spots about 10 times and made some notes about it, and I'm going to let him tell you about First Cause. Paul, welcome to the AC Lowe Show on the Shantani Broadcasting Network.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
It's good to see you. I saw you in an interview on TV, on YouTube, probably about a year or so ago?
Yeah. A couple of years ago.
More than that, then. When did you publish First Cause?
Well, I released it in 2009. In October of 2009 was my official release. I actually started writing it in about 1999, sort of drafting it, putting it together. And it took me a bunch of years. So it's been out for a couple of years.
And so this idea obviously came to you something that you'd been observing, I guess, in the world, and so this idea kind of got together or coalesced in your mind?
Well, I came up with the idea, interestingly enough, as an undergraduate at NYU, and I studied history, and I was just very interested in the human condition and why people did the things that they do, and how history happens and how it could be different. So I actually came up with the idea then, and so yeah, it's kind of a rumination on the human condition. I'm very, and I want to use this word, I don't use it lightly, I'm enthralled by the book because you certainly tap onto the human condition. President Kennedy had read The Guns of August by Barbara Tuchman, and he, in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and remember, I'm so old that I remember these things. I was a grown man. I wasn't a figment of my father's imagination at that point. I was a grown man, and he had read that, and he had discussed with his brother that they just kind of fell one mistake after another into the First World War. Yeah, that's true.
To a point where no one could back out with honor.
Yeah, or at least people felt that way. It's funny because I've been saying probably since I was an undergrad that one of the most instructive facts of the 20th century is the fact that World War I was called the war to end all wars, because we sort of stumbled our way into it as a species, and then when it happened, people were so shocked by it that they were like, we can never do this again, and of course
they formed the League of Nations,
right, and then of course they pretty much set up, and guaranteed that the second one would happen.
At the League of Nations, and I want to just digress here and there because I want to stay with the book. I think the book actually directly talks about these kinds of things. At the League of Nations, President Wilson was talking with the Italian ambassador and the German ambassador, and he said, how did it come to this? Right. And the German ambassador said, if we only knew. In other words, he really, even after 4 years of debt, destruction, and absolute horror, he's an educated and informed man who honestly said that he didn't know why we did it at all. It was just insanity.
Well, that's the kind of thing that motivated me to write the book, actually, and even it's kind of the why I called it what I did is I've not always, but pretty much my whole adult life been interested in trying to sort of get to the bottom of why history repeats itself in the ways it does, and why we can fly across the world in a day, but we still basically have the same social problems we had 1,000 years ago.
and you touch upon that in the book quite well.
Thank you.
And in fact, you remind me of Gene Roddenberry.
Gene Roddenberry? Yes. That's a real compliment.
Well, let me tell you why. Gene Roddenberry supposedly was a wonderful science fiction writer, but indeed he was doing social commentary. Well, he's the guy
behind Star Trek now.
Absolutely.
It's interesting.
Very thinly veiled.
Yeah. Star Trek is interesting to me. I mean, I'm not a big Star Trek fan necessarily, but I know that there's a lot of threads of that. And I actually am a big fan of the old Twilight Zone, which is with Rod Serling.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much straight up social commentary.
Yeah, talking about the human psyche.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you do very well.
A lot of it's inspired by that stuff.
So I'm going to do my very poor summary, and then you can pick it up from there. We're talking about a society that left the Earth some years ago, a superior society, forming a utopian paradise on another location, another planet.
Or trying to.
And then after a period of time, some, not all, think that they should develop a militaristic society, a subculture, which they call the Terranauts, I believe.
Well, though they were sort of the advanced scouts, but basically,
right. Okay, those are the advanced scouts, and over a period of time they have several 100,000, but they don't tell the rest of their population. Right. The group that forms that hasn't told the rest of the Luceri. Yeah. They call themselves the Luceri, and now they return to Earth, and I don't want to give away the book too much, but they return to Earth by they have a plan to create panic, uncertainty, chaos, and knowing the human condition, like we just discussed, that should be adequate. They don't need atom bombs; they just need a few well-placed explosions and stuff. So,
that's right. You got it right, pretty much.
And so, all of these ideas came to you in a way that when you observe the world.
Yeah.
Actually. I'm watching these young people now down downtown, who I promise not to talk about, and I see what they're doing, and I'm sure that at some point the real estate lobby will sit down with the mayor and the police commissioner and say, all right, I've had enough, get them out of there.
Well, did you hear actually what happened? I just saw something. Am I speaking at a good...
Absolutely,
okay?
Very good, yeah. Our engineer will...
I should talk to her. I should lean in.
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay.
Yeah.
I actually just saw something today that apparently Chase Morgan, or JP Morgan Chase, made some historically large donation to the NYPD to fund, their deterrence of these people who are down on Wall Street, and they basically gave them a lot of money to fund the operation to shut this whole thing down.
Fund the operation to shut them down.
Arrest, 800 people and 700 people.
Well, the people are trying to say something important. I don't know if they're loud enough at this point. Unfortunately, history shows that sometimes in the 60s, the protests were very loud, and not that I was in support of all of them, but there was a constant and consistent message at that time. And I think that young people want to say something, they don't know quite how to say it.
And that's part of the problem. Yeah, is that it's not focused, and there are just a lot of factions in it. A lot of them, they're not all in it for the same reasons. You really,
exactly.
700 people, from all these different places be in it for the same reasons. And it doesn't help, really, unfortunately.
The same thing happened in the 60s. There was a lot of fragmentation, but there was the war provided the focus.
Yeah,
the Vietnam War provided the focus. Everyone agreed that we shouldn't be in the war.
Yeah, and then Watergate made it really easy.
Right, and made it easier to focus. But nowadays there isn't any draft because technology has reduced the requirements for personnel.
We don't need to pour troops into something.
Yeah, you don't need. Right, exactly, and that is probably why we haven't had riots in the street for much before this.
Yeah, I think that's probably true because, the funny thing is, when people don't have to worry about sending their own kids necessarily, then it becomes less of an issue, or going themselves. But I guess the one thing that's counterbalanced that lack of urgency is the fact that, just like in the 60s with the riots in Chicago, the famous chant, "The whole world is watching."
Yeah.
I mean, that was sort of probably the official beginning of that as a part of history, where people can be galvanized by the fact that it isn't just something you imagine to be bad, or you think we might not be up to something that we're being told we're up to, but you can actually see photos of stuff that happens, whether it's across the world or miscarriages of justice, and all these things. So people are just more informed, and I think that sort of maybe takes the place of 40 years ago where people were like, I don't want to send my own kid or go over there myself on some loopy excursion. Now it's just you're still there in a way. And
I see your point because and also the communications that we have now is very different because of the internet. Everything is instantly seen and heard, and I think that the internet played a major role in what's going on in the Middle East now in at least half a dozen countries in a major way. I mean, we've changed the guard. We've had a changing of the guard in 3 very large. I see by the shadow on the floor that we have to pay some bills here, otherwise we can't run the Shantani Broadcasting Network. Again, I urge you, don't touch that mouse. We'll be right back here on the AC Lowe Show with Paul West right after these messages, so hang on tight. We are back here on the Shantani Broadcasting Network. I'm AC Lowe, and this is the Shantani Broadcasting Network. We just have to tell you a couple of little messages that we neglected to do so earlier. Basically speaking, you are listening to www.shantanibroadcasting.com. If it is around 6 p.m. or 6:30 or so on Monday, October the 3rd, 2011, you are listening to this program live. We broadcast live to you from Chez Jacqueline at 72 McDougal Street, right off the corner of Houston Street here in New York City. And we want to say thank you to all of our listeners all over the world, especially to the guy in the Aleutian Islands. Thank you for listening to the AC Lowe Show. People in Australia, New Zealand, listening to AC Lowe Show, and in Japan, and across the United States and in Europe, of course, in Africa. But about half of our listeners are right here in the metropolitan area, and I urge you to come on down to Chez Jacqueline, 72 McDougal Street, right in the heart of Greenwich Village, and you will never be sorry. You got great food here, great wait staff. Come on down and meet the owner, Frank Girardi, who is our host this evening and letting us broadcast live to you Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday nights from Chez Jacqueline all through the month of October. And we will enjoy to see you. We really want to see you. We are talking with Paul West, the author of First Cause. And Paul, you said that during the break that you had the idea kind of all at one time and then had to flesh it out. How did that go?
I did. Studying history, I was, it's funny you make these references to the 20th century, like World War I and Kennedy. That was actually the stuff I focused on because the international relations, at least in the 20th century, international relations is interdisciplinary. You know, like it involves economics and military considerations and politics and ethnicity and all this stuff because the world just suddenly started to get smaller. And so yeah, I really came up with it when I was reading these things and also just sort of, you know, paying attention and sort of studying people in my everyday life.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, and I think that the idea you have is kind of unique because these people, the Luceri, are actually descendant from Earthlings.
Yeah, they're people.
They came from Earth. And I forgot exactly the years but you had shown a timeline where they were flying some 150 years prior to the rest
actually,
of the world.
that took a lot of work. One of the reasons the first like 2.5 years of the book, even though my grasp of history is pretty good, but I really constructed that timeline around actual history and, you know, I was really careful about, like, you know, I studied population, you know, curves.
Yeah, I noticed that because I'm a student of history myself, a minor student to be sure. I've written a history book. I'm sure you haven't read it, and we'll leave it at that. But I saw that in your writing, and I compliment you because I know that is a lot of work. The research, kind of what we call ditch digging. You have to really get in there with pick and shovel, and it takes a long time to clean out one fact, and then work around that fact, and it takes a long time.
And it was actually built around actual history, so that, you know, I mean, obviously there's some suspended disbelief with, you know, the technological advances, but even like the rate of like technological advance, I wanted to be at least within the realm of plausibility. Like I didn't want them to just be flying 10 years after they decided to be, you know, a civilization, because that'd be stupid. Yeah. So, you know, I wanted.
Well, you gave it a very realistic bent.
I tried to do that.
The one part I missed, I must have missed more than one, but a part that I didn't see, and I must have missed it, is that how did these people, seeing as they were spread throughout the world, how did they come together while still on Earth and make this collective decision to leave the Earth?
Well, what they actually did, that was why it sort of started in the year 1000, and it started, you know, in the Mediterranean area, which is like a hub. That's actually why that took basically 1,000 years. So by the time that they were in a position to do things that we've done in the 20th century, they were basically only 50 years ahead of the general, let's say, Western European first world curve. So, you know, by that point, you know, if you place someone in 1920, 50 years ahead of the curve, then they're in a position to communicate, you know, the way that we were communicating as first worlders in the 1970s or 80s. But before that, throughout the centuries, no, it was just like every other group that spread throughout the world. It was, you know,
So in 1973, in March of 73, I believe, when they began to really talk in earnest about doing this, they were probably
operating in 2000s.
In 2020, 2030.
And we're really just the early 2000s. I mean, one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that there's sort of a trickle-down effect technologically, and things that reach us, you know, as regular people, whether it's smartphones, you know, long-range digital cameras and stuff, have actually, you know, a lot of them have their inception in like military R&D and things like that. So, you know, I mean, we've been reading license plates from satellites since I was a little kid, you know. So I mean, it's not that implausible. It's maybe to most people, but
I follow you exactly. If this were TV, you would see AC Lowe smiling because Google Earth and Google Chrome and all the stuff that people have now is essentially a toy.
People think that's new, but
this is
not.
a toy. This is probably the technology, the top secret technology that President Kennedy had almost 50 years ago during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, or at least in the early 70s, and that's what's funny, I mean, if you think about, like, when Sputnik and these other things went up, most people didn't even have televisions yet. So there's always like a 10 to 20 year lag between the real front end of these things. So,
and they really didn't understand the potential of satellites, as many scientists did. They didn't realize what could be done by satellite and everything that goes on by satellite. The average person had absolutely no concept.
Not at all.
There were a few people that may have known, but very, very few.
There was a famous quote from, I think it was an IBM, it might even have been the president of IBM in the 70s, or some major computer company who said, there's no reason to believe that anyone would want a computer in their home.
Yes,
really, and that was actually said with a straight face. And something like 76. And
back in the late 70s, I was partners with a man by the name of Alan Goldrich, and he had worked in the ground floor of what we call OCR technology today, which is optical character reader technology.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And this is like late 70s, early 80s. And at a seminar discussing the product, explained that there'll be the capacity to have 1 gigabyte. And a professor from New York University, I don't know from what discipline, if he was technologically tuned or if he was a history professor or an English major, but he said, why in hell would anybody need a gigabyte of
Isn't that
capacity?
funny?
Well, he was a very intelligent and well-informed man for that period of time. And I myself, standing in the back of the room, I thought, he's right.
That's funny.
Yeah, I didn't foresee the requirement for terabytes and beyond. And
all
beyond.
That stuff.
Yeah, and the software eats up a lot of that now, too.
It's amazing. And now we have people, or people's phones have 16 gigs of memory, and it's crazy more than that.
Yeah.
There's a quote that I really like. I always forget who says it. It says, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from science fiction or indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah.
And then I think it was Leary, or one of like the psychedelic gurus.
Yeah. Tim Leary.
With whom I take issues in some ways. But he basically said that the quote was, we're in science fiction now. And he said in the 50s, I think it was Ginsberg, he said, we're in science fiction now. And people don't think about how true that is, but a lot of things that occur will happen in 5 years were preposterous 10 years ago, and that curve's speeding up, because it used to be 50-year jumps, and now it's like 5-year jumps.
There's a comedian that emanates right from the Village here, right from Greenwich Village, and he's all of a sudden doing well after 20 years of trying, Louis C.K. And one of his bits is that everything is amazing and no one is happy. And he tells a story about it. So you're right about technology. Technology has taken us to a point where we have even come to expect this superior technology, almost to that we don't have to do anything. We just look at something.
Because it's been commodified, and that's, it's funny how that works, So
now the Luceri, they send this advanced group to the Earth.
Right.
And they are instructed, for the most part, to not make any lasting connections with Earthlings. If you have to talk to them, only talk where there's necessary. Don't draw attention to yourself.
Right. Yeah, it's like being a double agent. Like you want to make sure that you know who everybody is, but they don't necessarily remember you.
Right. And one of the leads in your book, she makes the mistake of becoming closer than she's or her mission statement provided for, and that's somehow where we open up in somewhere in that particular area.
Well, the thing about her backstory is that one of the reasons I flash back to her early life is that she was.
Can we say her name?
Angela.
Angela. But her real name is Agreli. Agreli. Yeah, that's her Lucerian name. Is that a word, Lucerian? Have I just invented it?
Well, you know what's actually really funny? This is something I'm still working on, but you know the book of Clockwork Orange?
Yes, of course.
And the whole idea is that was set in the future, and I guess the going language in this book was supposed to be like an amalgam of a lot of languages, including like Russian tongues and stuff.
Yeah.
And there are editions of A Clockwork Orange, I'm pretty sure, where they break down the actual language, so that there's like a glossary of terms.
Yes.
So when these guys throw their jargon around, you can flip back and go, oh, that's what that means. I'm actually, believe it or not, working on like a Luceri glossary, so that, because this is the first.
Well, do you think that you would come back in a short time from now, and we can talk in Luceri back and forth?
Whenever I come back, well, I don't know if we can have full conversations.
I don't know how big our audience will be, but
we can give it a shot. It'll be a little more extensive than Pig Latin, but but it'll.
Now that I can talk.
Yeah,
I can speak Pig Latin.
Not at all. But I wanted to have an internal consistency, the whole story. So like when I flash back to Angela's early childhood, like, she was something of a perceptual outlier, so to speak. She'd always sort of had misgivings, and so it wasn't exactly out of nowhere that she in particular just sort of woke up.
Do you think that human part of her was somewhat stronger? They were not able to suppress it in the training and orientation from childhood?
Not really. I mean, I think one of the reasons I constructed the story that way is I think that everyone, sort of regardless of background or whatever, it's all sort of continuums. You know what I mean?
Yes.
From like one end to the other. And, in any population, whether it's the bigger you get, obviously the easier it is to come by. But, there sooner or later you're going to come with a percentage of people that for whatever reason pretty much lack empathy, lack critical thought, lack curiosity. And it has nothing to do, I'm a very much a nurture over nature person, but, there's some people I think who just, for whatever reason, don't have that. And I think that there are a very small percentage who really seem to have more of it, who are just more thusly inclined, than the average person. And I think that's sort of almost why I set up this comparison between utopian and anti-utopian in the same book, because these things can occur anywhere. No matter how great of a society you create, there are going to be people who are violent, and no matter how bad one. Oh, we're getting a signal. And no matter how
there you go. You're a good radio man. There you go.
No matter how awful of a society you create, there will still be someone who sort of speaks out against it. And I think that's what's interesting.
And that's true of every culture and group without question. Absolutely.
It's a reason to hope, too.
Oprah did a show, the 50th anniversary of the Freedom Riders, the bus ride.
Yeah.
And at the time when some members of the Ku Klux Klan and just regular townspeople who weren't really bona fide Ku Klux, they were burning the bus, and they had locked the door so people couldn't get out. They would be burned alive in the bus.
Yeah.
And there was a 12-year-old white girl who couldn't have it. Yeah. And she rushed through there, and she pushed that stuff away and got burned. She doesn't know why to this day. Oprah had her on the show. She just wasn't going to do that.
I mean,
her mother did it, her father, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, and God knows how far back. And her family was threatened that they would have to leave that town, even though she was just a 12-year-old girl, because they had raised a child who didn't feel like they did, with the hatred that everyone had.
Funny? And that's
and she doesn't know why. She didn't give Oprah any big reason. She said, I don't know, it's just not right.
Just couldn't see it.
Yeah, I mean,
history sometimes, really hinges on the conscientious objectors, and that's why there's always hope, but at the same time, that's why you always have to pay attention, because, like, the Luceri can create this utopian society, but there's still going to be a small percentage that says, hey, what if we give these guys guns and decide to go back? And it's the same. It works the same way in both directions.
Yeah, it does. Okay, we really have to go now back to our bill-paying group. We will be right back with Paul West on the AC Lowe Show right after this message. And we're back here on the AC Lowe Show on the Shantani Broadcasting Network. We're talking with Paul West, the author of First Cause, which is a science fiction novel, but is loaded with social commentary, even as Gene Roddenberry loaded Star Trek with social commentary. Paul, now that they have landed on Earth and they're putting their plan in place, let's talk a little bit about the people back on Lucera who wanted to put this together. I see the way you put those characters
the directors,
together. Yeah, they're the directors, and they're only a portion of the leadership. They're not the entire leadership, because it's still secret.
And they were sort of handpicked by the person who came up with the idea, and he went.
Yeah, I have his name in my notes here.
A lot. The funny thing is, a lot of that stuff really was basically inspired by our intelligence. Not to get myself in trouble, but it was inspired by our intelligence community and all that stuff, or anything you read about the Cold War. And it really is.
I've always been very. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Paul. I've always been very skeptical about our intelligence community, and in fact all of the intelligence communities. I know they do a great deal of great work and good work, but the sterling example that I see, a glaring example, is that during the Vietnam War we had a Democratic president and a Democratic administration, and he was quickly replaced by a Republican president and a Republican administration.
Yeah.
And both of them had experts from the intelligence community, the military community, the political and the business, and had unlimited experts, both of them, Republicans and Democrats. And not one expert, not one, said to the President of the United States, Mr. President, leave Vietnam and nothing will happen here.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's what happened. Yeah. When we were thrown out of Vietnam, it's been 36 years since April 1975. Yeah. Nothing has happened here. Now, I know there's people that could stand up and talk for hours how we really got screwed because we're not there, but that's a lie.
Yeah, it's not.
Nothing's happened here. Not a damn thing.
You know what's really funny? Like I said, I really read extensively on that stuff. The first thing that happened, and you know, people have their opinions sort of about French foreign policy and the French and the wars and France and America and all that stuff. But, God, what was his name? The Prime Minister of France in 54. What's wrong with me? Charles de Gaulle.
Charles de Gaulle.
Charles de Gaulle. I have this long quote. I still have it home. In Dien Bien Phu, when French.
Yeah, we lost at Dien Bien Phu, and he poured even though it was a military stupidity, he poured every French unit in there, including their prime unit, the last unit that they had, and because of honor.
And that's right. And you know what he said to us? And at the time when he got out of there, he said, so let's like a paragraph, and he says, you guys, this is a bad idea. And at the end of it, he says, I predict you'll sink step by step. I'm pretty close to this. Step by step into a bottomless political and military quagmire, no matter how much you spend in men and money. And he said that in 54. And there's a great book. I'll plug somebody else's book. There's a book by John Lewis Gaddis called Strategies of Containment that I've read like 3 times. And it goes sort of behind the scenes in the development of containment policy. And there were a lot of people, in our, intelligence community or, upper echelons of it who were telling Johnson especially, listen, this might not be a good idea. When McNamara was just trying to throw numbers at it and all these other things, and there were people who were like, listen, guys, I think it was George Ball was the spearhead of that movement, who said this is a bad call. We're not going to save anything, and we're just forestalling, embarrassment and just killing people by doing it.
And one by one they fell to the wayside. There's a book called The Limits of Intervention. You may have read it by Townsend Hoops.
I haven't read it, but yeah.
Yeah, and he talks about it as well. But their voices must have been on the Lowe channel.
Oh, they were.
Yeah, they had guys like McGeorge Bundy, Dean Rusk.
I interviewed McGeorge Bundy.
And McNamara made an about face years later.
He did.
He covered himself very well.
Funny, he did.
Yeah. Even in his book, he had nothing to say that he should have done differently. No. So, I don't buy into any of that. I don't buy into it at all. I think that's why, back to the original premise, I'm very skeptical of experts from any community, because not one guy really talked loud enough to get us the hell out of there, save 30,000. Mr. Nixon came in with the promise of getting out of the war. When we didn't get out of the war, he said, we got to get out with honor. That honor cost another 30 or 35,000 lives.
Yeah, again, not to get problematic, but I don't really think he intended to get out of there in any way. But,
not at all.
He was, I think he was kind of more of the MacArthur mentality, just bomb them into the Stone Age, mentality. And
ironically,
that's not going to work.
Ironically, General MacArthur warned President Johnson not to get bogged down in the war in Asia.
He did. Which is ironic.
At least he said so in his book.
He did. But, I think earlier on when he was like the big Pacific Theater guy, I think he was talking differently. But I think, that's what's sort of funny how it works is sometimes, the people who come from sort of a wrong-headed perspective and switch it around, or at least who are immersed in, sort of the wrong way of looking at things, sometimes have a better understanding of the full picture, because when they come out of it, they say, wow, wait a minute. Kind of like RFK was, a hawk until he traveled, the Deep South and whatever, and he said, wait a minute, the world's nothing like I thought it was. Yeah. And then he made a complete,
change. Now, let me ask you, do you think that the United States at some point in time will come to think that we don't have a right to take armed force into other nations that are not attacking this country?
I think that It's really impossible to answer because the reasons why we've done it, there's so many overlapping reasons, and in some cases we get talked into it after the fact. In some cases we get, lathered up, to buy into it, and then everyone gets on board. And, there's so many reasons. The short answer is probably not for a while. But I don't know. But all that stuff did inspire, the directors. That's kind of why I created them the way I did. It was because, if you look at some of the stuff that was done, here, during the Cold War era. I mean, there's something, I think it was Truman or somebody, when Eisenhower was coming in as president, he said that somebody said they felt sorry for Truman because he was like, he's going to come in here and think that the president runs the country. And he's going to come in here and think it's like the military. I tell this guy and you tell that guy and he tells this guy and stuff happens. That's not how it happens. Nothing happens.
Not at all.
And so that's sort of what inspired the directors, was the idea that, again, even if you create this utopian society and you kind of do everything right, that's the aim. But you still have to be paying attention, because all it takes is one person with the resources and the smarts to go behind people's back and say, just get a couple of people on board, and then by the time you wake up, there's a whole operation in place, and that happens all the time.
And especially
resources. I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah, especially in the intelligence community, but the military community as well. I heard several of the generals over the last 5 or 8 years or so of the two wars, and they sound just so much like the generals of the Vietnam War.
It's funny.
They all say, give me X number of troops additional, and I'll square away this whole thing. Yeah, because they all dream of heading up these large legions of armed forces, because that's how they name.
And they're thinking of it as a different kind of thing than what it is, and they don't realize that there's a difference between, what these kinds of wars are basically wars of occupation.
Yes.
And it's not the same thing as, even like, a war, even like World War I, where, you have conscripted troops who are in a battlefield, line up in trenches, and it's X amount of these people and X amount of those people, and you just throw bodies at it.
You're talking about European warfare.
Yeah. And
you're not talking about Asian warfare,
China drove us out of Korea, human wave attacks. Yeah. But it's not the same thing as when you take a country, especially a country like Vietnam, that has spent 1,000 years throwing out bigger countries. I mean, the French couldn't do it, the Japanese couldn't do it, and then, Japan's right next door, and they're basically, the Germans of the Pacific Rim, at that time in history, they couldn't do it.
They couldn't do anything about
it. So it's not more numbers.
Yeah, that's where I hope someday that some leader that we have here will have the courage to say, no, I'm not going to have a war. I'm going to find out about these things and see what we can do in a better way. I don't know if that'll ever come to pass. I know personally a number of people who served, and often they would be involved in what we call now firefights. They used to be called battles. And sometimes they would kill people that lived the equivalent of 2 or 3 blocks away.
Yeah.
And had lived there for generations. And their mother and grandmother would come screaming and crying.
It's crazy.
And it occurred to my friend, who was a 19-year-old boy at the time, with not very much education, what am I doing here?
You're recruiting for the enemy, actually.
What am I doing? What am I doing here? These people have lived here, and I'm from 10,000 miles away. My government sends me from 10,000 miles away with armed force.
Yeah.
What in God's name am I doing here?
Yeah.
And
well, that's what's scary too, is that a lot of the time populations tend to wake up, so to speak, or we all elect leaders of the kind you're talking about. When things really get catastrophic, unfortunately, it takes something so preposterous or something so really strikingly awful that people go, wow, and then they reconsider things. But people don't reconsider their reality or their approach to it or their politics until something really, really big or really, really bad happens. And again, that's another thing that motivated this book, is that, instead of sort of reconsidering how we think of ourselves as human beings, or how I identify between or amongst ourselves. Unfortunately, the thing that might have to happen is something that's been brewing under our noses for a long time finally just sort of comes to fruition in a hurry, and then people ask themselves, how the heck did they come to this?
Well, that's what the German ambassador told President Wilson.
He goes, I don't know.
We only knew. Now, if someone wants to buy First Cause, what do they have to do?
Well, it is on the Amazon Kindle. It is on the Amazon Kindle. If you go to Amazon.com, it is available from a couple of sellers, which is interesting. Other people have bought it, and then, now they're selling it, which I guess they think it's worth selling, which is cool. Being independently published, I am the seller First Cause Project, so that's me. If you buy from that seller, it will come from me. It is also available, well, there's really those two things right now. It's in a few other bookstores. It's in St. Mark's Books on St. Mark's in East Village. It's also in Blue Stockings Books on, I believe, Allen Street in the East Village. And I just released new cover art, which isn't in the mix yet, but is soon to come. So
now I guess you can get them from all the other usual suspects as well, because they have a general way of accessing books. You can even go to Barnes & Noble, probably.
Well, that's the thing. It's not on Barnes & Noble yet. It was on the Nook, but there's sort of a formatting issue, which I will announce via Twitter. My Twitter handle is First Cause NYC. There you go. And on my website, and I'll announce when it's available in the Nook. But right now, Amazon.com and the Amazon Kindle, if you want to read the ebook, the digital book, that's the way to go.
And the great thing about New York is that it's such, and I don't want to say this maybe because there's so many people listening, but if you come to New York, let me know what you think about it. This is a great literary city and a great academic city and a highly cultured city. Yeah. And don't go by the appearances. Come on up to New York. If you're not in New York, make a trip up here. It's well worth it. And the people are not at all what people talk about. I've seen emergencies and crisis here in New York City, and the people come out and step up to the plate.
I definitely feel like I'm lucky to be from here.
Yeah, it's a fantastic place to be from. We're very fortunate. I'm going to give Betty a break. We came in late twice on the commercial. Now we're going to be like about 34 seconds early.
Yeah, so we
will be back here on the AC Lowe Show on the Shantani Broadcasting Network with our guest, Mr. Paul West, and right after these messages. We are back here. We are back on the AC Lowe Show on Shantani Broadcasting Network. We are talking with the author Paul West. He is the author of the book First Cause. And Paul, just to briefly summarize the work and your purpose. I know you don't have much. We're not giving you a lot of time, but just briefly.
To summarize, I think you actually did a really good job of it. It's science fiction in premise, but it's more science fiction in the sense of like an old Rod Serling or even the Gene Roddenberry stuff. It's sort of meant to inspire thought. Been told it's a page turner. I think it reads pretty well. It ends. It's the beginning of a trilogy, which I've sort of officially come to call the Terranaut trilogies. The Terranaut trilogy. So it's book one, and it's available, as I said before, at St. Mark's Books in East Village, Blue Stockings Books in East Village in New York. And if you go to Amazon.com and type in First Cause, actually it comes right up. First Cause in books. It's $2.99 on the Amazon Kindle, and you can download it. And it's a pretty interesting read. It's been well received so far. I'm pretty happy with it, and the new cover art's pretty cool. And yeah.
Well, without letting the cat out of the bag, how far along are the second and third parts of the trilogy?
Well, the second book, it's interesting because the first book ends on, let's just call it something of a cliffhanger.
Yes.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
It ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. I think the story still works pretty well as a self-contained unit, but the second book will sort of wrap around the first book, meaning it's a sequel/prequel. It picks up where the first book leaves off, but then kind of goes, it's not as much in flashback mode as the early part of the first book, but it gives a little more of the backstory, like you and I talked about the Luceri and about Angela. It actually is going to specifically discuss Angela, who's one of our
heroes. Who would play Angela in the movie?
I have no idea. I've asked myself that. It's funny. I'll know when I see her, I guess. And it started as a screenplay idea, which I say on my website, and it's come up a couple times. And I've had people tell me that it reads like it would make a good movie, which is kind of a cool compliment.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. I don't know who would play her.
Yeah, we have to get
someone tall.
Someone really tall. Someone really tall.
But yeah, so it addresses her life a little bit in the backstory of the directors. It addresses them, and then it moves forward with the continuing saga.
It's interesting about who the actors would be. You have Adam Gray and Cyrus Reardon and so many other side and important roles to be played, and the actors can sink their teeth into these roles because it's much more serious, in my view, than just a science fiction. Like you say, there's a great deal of social commentary, and it speaks to the human condition, which, again, I compliment you for doing such a wonderful mix in your work. And I hope that you have every success. And I'm waiting for book number 2 and number 3, and and go see the movie.
And I guess everyone's always telling me to sort of remember to plug it. The website is firstcauseproject.com. There's a blog, of course, firstcauseproject.blog.com, and then on Facebook, the book actually has a Facebook page, which if you like it, please go on and like my book. It's facebook.com/firstcause. Easy enough.
Okay, and it has its own Facebook page.
It has its own Facebook page, yeah.
And what would we find on there? I mean, what do you have on the
really just the occasional updates about radio shows that I do. I started a sports blog on the side. It's called Upon Further Review, and the link is on there.
Okay.
So you can go on that, and it gives updates. It shows the new cover art, which is actually really cool. My buddy Joey Rosa, I'll give him a plug, helped me put it together. And it's just news and events on First Cause. When it hits new bookshelves, when I have new book signings, I'm trying to schedule a book signing for the fall or for the late fall. So
you let us know when that happens.
I will definitely let you know.
Paul, it's been a pleasure having you here. I see by the shadow on the floor once again that we are out of time. You've been listening to the AC Lowe Show on the Centennial Broadcasting Network. Don't touch that mouse, please, because the very next show right after this